mean, in comparison, you might say there's still some distances between certain countries. Like, for instance, if you look at like Scandinavian countries, they're more ahead in this regard than maybe other countries.
Hey everyone, it's Tony Will. Oh my gosh, this is going to be such a great episode of Women In. I know I say that a lot, but I have the best guests, and I can't wait for you to meet this guest. But before you meet her, let me tell you what you're listening to. Women In is a podcast that celebrates women from all walks of life and the people who uplift them. Each episode features incredible voices from my world, sharing stories that spark inspiration, challenge the status quo, and remind us that empowering women empowers everyone. This is a bold, curious, and uncensored space where disruption is welcome, forward thinking is encouraged, and change is the goal. I'm passionate about breaking down barriers, not just for us, but for the next generations. Whether our paths cross professionally or personally, these conversations matter. Let's dive in and celebrate the power of connection, growth, and the people who are shaping our world. And this woman is definitely one of them. Getting to the bio because I had other screens up. We're in real time. Zolal Habibi is an Iranian human rights activist and a prominent voice for justice, democracy, and women's rights in Iran. She serves on the Foreign Affairs Committee of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, NCRI, where she advocates globally for a secular, democratic republic in Iran. With over 25 years of dedicated activism, she has become a fierce advocate on behalf of the voiceless inside Iran. Zolal's activism began in her teens, profoundly shaped by the loss of her father, a respected Iranian writer and political dissident who was killed by the regime during the 1988 massacre when she was only 7. This personal tragedy ignited a lifelong commitment to ensuring that no other family suffers such loss and that the voices of Iran's political prisoners, dissidents, and freedom seekers are heard on the world stage. Hi, Zolal.
Hi, Tony. It's a pleasure to be with you, and thank you for the opportunity. And please allow me to greet all of those who are tuning into the podcast today.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to have you on. And there's so much I want to learn from you. And immediately when we were connected, I thought this is a woman's story that I want to hear. I personally want to hear more about, and that the world needs to hear more about. So in your bio, you really are vulnerable about not only your loss at such a young age with your dad passing, but what meaning and purpose came from that and the work you've been doing the past 25 years. So I'm going to ask a really broad question and I'm going to let you take it from there. But I guess I want to talk about when you're losing your dad at the age of 7 and what you saw at such a young age and how you have been able to make such meaning and purpose and change for women in Iran. When did you know? When did you know that this is what I was going to do and I was going to stand up for this? Did you know at 7?
No, I don't think I was the age of 7, but I guess afterwards when I did choose this path, everyone was like, we knew that you would do this. We knew that at the end of the day, this was like your direction in life. But I guess to just give you a glimpse of what it was like, far before my father being killed, I got introduced to the human rights situation in Iran. And so that was always like part and parcel of my life. Even though, I was born and raised in the US, I was I'm from the generation that was born after the revolution. So I've never actually had the opportunity to visit Iran or see Iran. But I can literally say there hasn't been a day in my life that I haven't thought about the plight of the Iranian people and what is going on there. So I always had that connection. I think I went to my first demonstration like at the age of like when I was 3 days old. So you could just imagine like that was always part of activism and being outspoken about the situation in Iran was always a part of my life in a way. And I grew up with that reality. Especially because of my parents' activities as activists and also my father as a writer and prominent writer and a human rights activist. I think I was about 4 or 5 the first time I met people who were victims of torture. And they were actually staying at our house for like 2 weeks. they had come to testify at the United Nations and at the U.S. Congress, and so they were staying with us. And I remember, they became my real life superheroes. I remember trying to push them to get out their stories from them, but all of them were like, no, she's a child. She shouldn't be hearing about these things. She shouldn't even know that we're ex-political prisoners or whatnot. But, I was able to get one of them finally to, just because I wouldn't give up, to tell me his story, but like a rated G version, suitable for a 40. But I always understood that, the freedoms that I have here are not something that are available to everyone. It's not something that's, a given for many others around the world. And so that just changes your perspective on valuing democracy and freedom and using your voice. And so that was like part of my life, but I always thought like we're here and that is in Iran. And that was always a reality. But then when my father died, I realized that no, the regime sees no borders when it comes to its atrocities. And this is a global fight. And no matter where you are, you can make a difference and you can make an impact. And, but I think one of the most important aspects for me was, I never saw myself as maybe like the victim in a way. Even though I was a victim of the regime, I still considered myself to be one of the lucky ones because I knew I didn't have to live under the circumstances that girls my age had to live under in Iran. And also I knew so many others around me who had a situations far worse than what I did. Like, for instance, I had friends who had lost both of their parents, or friends who had to actually were taken to prison with their parents, and they had to actually bear witness to the atrocities in some of the most notorious prisons to date in man's history. And they were the only ones who were walking around the prisons without blindfolds. So they saw a lot of things that even their parents who were in prison were not seeing. And I always considered myself to be one of the lucky ones. But also, even when I saw other Iranians, because I always, growing up, there's a very large Iranian diaspora in like the DC area where I grew up. And there were those who just felt, like hopeless, or also like they didn't think that they could create any change. Like we had to give in to the status quo. But I felt like I was one of the lucky ones to be introduced to the resistance, to know that there is another option, to know that there is something that I can do about it. And I think that really shaped who I became. I think I was about like 12 the first time that I went to the U.S. Congress, walking in, Capitol Hill, trying to get, members of Congress to sign on a resolution in regards to the human rights situation. And I saw myself as being responsible for that. It was like during my spring break in the 6th grade. But that always, I always looked at whatever situation that I came across, like, what are you going to do about it? And how are you going to make a difference in it? And I think that just really understanding that you have that agency is really important in these circumstances, because otherwise it's very easy to just give in to the situation and just feel like there isn't anything that you can do and just lose hope. And that is, like, I think the most important thing when you're faced with a dictatorship, not to lose hope and not to give in and not to give up. And that's why the motto that we have, it's a motto by Mrs. Rajavi. She's the president-elect of the Iranian resistance. She says, we can and we must. And I grew up with that motto since I was like 12, the first time that I heard it, like in school, and anything that I did, I always thought, we can and we must. There's nothing that we can't do. And that way, that really helped. And also, I think just having such great role models in my life, that they were right in front of me, and I got to experience them firsthand. And I realized, I think I was in high school when I first realized that having the understanding that I have is not a given. Like, for instance, I realized that, a lot of my own friends, they had these glass ceilings in their minds. There's certain things that women can't do, or hasn't been done or whatnot. And I didn't have those because in front of me, I had seen women's empowerment for years. I had seen women at all levels of leadership, be it social, political, even military. And I was like, there isn't anything that women can't do. And I guess it took me a while to understand, like, that's not a given for everyone to understand that. And I think nowadays, when we speak about it, it's very different than like 30 years ago. I remember back then, like, it was the Beijing Women's Conference in 1996. And back then, Hillary Clinton was first lady, and she was one of the keynote speakers there. And she said, women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. And that was supposed to be like a very progressive view at that time. And I remember back then when I heard that, I was like, that's like a given. If anything, if you want to end misogyny, you need women's empowerment, because that's the path that the Iranian resistance had gone. And since like 1989, for instance, all the secretary generals of the main Iranian opposition organization, the MEK-PMOI, have been women. And their entire leadership council of this movement since 1993 till today have been completely 100% women. And so we believe that women are the force for change. And you're not going to, you need to have equity to be able to reach equality. And that means having women's empowerment as a key force in fighting, discrimination, dictatorship in general.
This is so fascinating and tell me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing through your experience and your work that you do and your activism, and maybe I'm hearing it wrong, but I'm loving what I'm learning right now. It almost sounds like the U.S. is kind of behind the times when it comes to progressive measures for women activists or female empowerment or women leaders. Is that Am I hearing that correctly? Because it sounds like outside of the U.S. this is the norm, but here it seems like it's not.
Well, I don't think. In comparison, you might say there's still some distances between certain countries. Like, for instance, if you look at like Scandinavian countries, they're more ahead in this regard than maybe other countries. But I think that in general, and I'm not being biased here, it's just like a fact actually, but because of our own experience, is that the reality is that the Iranian resistance has been a pioneer in women's empowerment. And this is something that, like, for instance, I know professors who teach women's studies who we actually hold a women's conference every year. And I know people who have, or like one of the professors, she was the dean of, in Rhode Island University in women's studies and whatnot. She has been attending these conferences for like 30 years. Every year she looks forward to this conference just to see like what is it that the Iranian resistance has been able to accomplish this year in this regard. Because there's actually, she wrote an article that's how I actually got introduced to her, was when I was in high school. She wrote an article that was printed in a journal back then. And then she said, I've come across this movement that they have the most progressive view on women that I've ever learned about. And this was her study. This was where she worked, And she said the most important thing, it's not just a thesis, it's been actually put in practice. And that is something that's unprecedented. And so I think that for us, though, it didn't start necessarily with the issue of, women's rights. It started with, this is the path to be able to end the dictatorship ruling Iran. Because it's a misogynist regime. You need to be able to counter this misogynist regime by, you have to be able to present yourself 180 degrees opposed to that. If you have even the slightest amount of the same mentalities in yourself, you're not going to be able to fight this regime in its entirety. And you have to understand that the regime ruling Iran is not a classical dictatorship. It's a religious theocracy. So it makes it that much more complex because it's not just a classical dictatorship, it has an ideology behind it. The ideology that it tries to present in the context of religion, even though it has nothing to do with religion, it's just their way of manipulating religion to be able to keep their grip on power. So women have been suppressed systematically in this regime. And in fact, the first protest that formed against Khomeini was the Women's March on March 8th, International Women's Day, which was against the compulsory veil. And what's interesting is that if you look at the videos, the images from there, you see, because the hooligans of the regime were very brutal back then too, you see like a human chain around these protesters, which are all women who wear the scarf, and they're like, no, there should be no force in the way people dress. This is not some issue that you can intervene in. It's a personal choice for anyone, and no one should dictate to any woman or any human being how they should dress or how they shouldn't dress or what they, you can't dictate that. It's a free choice, and you have to recognize everyone's bodily autonomy and their rights. And so that was the first demonstration that formed against this regime. So from day one, I think it's really important to note that the women of Iran have never given in to this regime. From day one, they have been resisting. They have turned everything into a form of resistance. And this is why we also see that women are in the forefront of the resistance movement too. And I think in 2022, when people saw Mahsa Amini was killed in the streets of Iran, unfortunately, Mahsa Jina Amini, a Kurdish girl who was killed by the regime, the world was in awe by Iranian women coming to the streets, but that wasn't something that brewed overnight. This is something that has been in the making for over 3-4 decades now. And Mrs. Rajabi has actually been the mind behind it, because just to give you a background, in 1984, back then, the Iranian resistance used to do like an annual analysis of where they are and what they have been able to accomplish. And they realized that women were really striving in all fields, and they were the ones who were dealing with the most suppression, the most extreme methods of torture in prisons. They were being executed by the thousands, but they weren't being represented in the highest levels of leadership. And once they realized that, they're like, we need to change this entire system. And so since then, actually, Ms. Rajavi stepped up to that responsibility, and she became co-leader of this movement, but she didn't create herself as like the sole, female leader or something like that. She started taking the hands of every woman and saying, like, no, you have that potential. You can accomplish this. And she created a whole line of leaders, capable female leaders who are breaking those glass ceilings, who are breaking those misogynist views in society. And it's showing that, she always says that human beings, we are like a spring. The more pressure that you put on a spring, when you take that pressure off, the more capacity or capability it has to jump. And so that is the hidden potential in every single woman who has been systematically suppressed in this regime. So because of that, they have so much hidden potential, and they're willing to take more risks because they have really nothing to lose under this regime. And that is why they are the force for change in Iran. And that is what we've been seeing for, in the past 40 years. We have experienced it in our movement.
I love that spring analogy. That's really it is such a great way to look at how the pressure on women in particular, and how it just is a launching board for where we're headed. I think that's really cool, and I'm glad you shared that. I want to talk about you personally, Zolal, and talk about what it has been like for you because you were born and raised or grew up in America in the DC area. You're an activist for Iran and doing all these wonderful things. What is it like for you personally being a woman straddling two cultures?
Um, well, I think that when you grow up in it, it becomes like the norm for you because that's the only thing that you've experienced. But yeah, I guess in like growing up in the US, I always knew that there was this one part of my life that was being, normal kid, normal teenager and everything. Then there was this one other aspect of my life that was one that's connected to the situation in Iran, the human rights violations, the resistance, what needs to be done, and always that thought that, that yearning to be able to actually go to Iran, be able to see Iran, to be able to see my family that I have never been able to visit, to be able to serve my own people. Because I grew up with that I remember like when I was 4 or 5 years old, my dad would be like, we'll be in a free Iran in like 6 months, not even a year. And I never thought that, 40 years later, we have still not freed Iran and we have still not gone to Iran. But I think that my hope today and my belief that we will be seeing that dawn of freedom soon in Iran is more than ever today than in all of these years. But I think that, I grew up with this concept, I guess, in a way that it would be my parents' generation's responsibility to free Iran, and it was our responsibility to go and rebuild Iran, and make it like the prosperous country that it deserves to be. Right now, Iran has the greatest brain drain in the world. If you look at every university in the US, there is at least one Iranian professor there, based on statistics. And even if you look at all the like top Fortune 500 companies, you always see like Iranians at the top, somewhere there. And just imagine if these people were actually able to serve their own country and their own people. But unfortunately, like that is, I think, the greatest asset of Iran that it has been denied. And these days, unfortunately, we are seeing the elite of Iran who are currently their prodigies who are in prison right now. Why? Because they oppose this regime. Just unfortunately, in the past, since the ceasefire till now, the regime has started a new wave of executions in Iran of political prisoners. That they are making a note of it to announce them on daily basis. I mean, this isn't something new. Executions in Iran, just in 2025, 2,200 people were executed. In January, we witnessed thousands of people were killed in the streets. But making a note of it to try to announce to everyone that we are carrying out political executions every single day, they want to create fear in society, and to just take away the hope that the people of Iran do have to be able to see change. One of those who was executed just about 2 months ago now, his name was Vahid Bani Amirian. Vahid was he graduated at the top of his class. He was an engineer, and he was truly like a prodigy. When anyone who has known him, his school, everything shows that. But he spent years in prison, and then he was finally executed for his for affiliation with the Iranian resistance movement. And one of the things that has been very interesting for me is that since his execution, a lot of videos of him have surfaced, videos, letters, audio notes that he left, like for his mom as his final farewell. And these have all come to light now. And it is to the extent that everyone is just like in awe by this guy. Actually, there was a article about him in the Guardian and the Sunday Times. And just yesterday, I think there was an article about him again. And, it's interesting for me that at a time that, unfortunately, on day-to-day basis, there's so many people being executed, these cases are drawing so much attention because it speaks volumes about what is the situation in Iran and who are those people who are being killed and who are those who are standing in the front lines against this regime. And that's why we believe that change is near. There was an article actually today in the Scotsman in Scotland about him too. And every time I see these, the fact that he was able to surpass all of these borders and his message is now resonating with the world to this extent, that really gets to me. And I see like that his messages are being translated, subtitled in different languages and spreading, because I think he has now turned into like a symbol of what is the fight is in Iran. For me, but going back to your question, I think that having these two parts in my life maybe is what led me to choose the path that I did, because I had the privilege of living under a democratic system. So that's why I understood what our people are being denied, because freedom is like oxygen. You don't feel it on day-to-day basis, but the minute that it's taken away from you, you will feel suffocated. And that is the reality that I grew up with understanding. And I think that is what brings on that responsibility. I could have very easily said, you know what, our family has done its part. My father was killed. My mom decided to join the resistance after my father was killed. And she has dedicated, 38 years of her life to this cause. And, we have, I had to grow up with practically without my parents, since the age of like 9, 10. And we've done our part. Let other people do it. But instead, I felt like because I have an understanding that others don't, I have more of a responsibility to do something now and to prevent another generation from going through what we did. And that brought more responsibility for me. So for me, like the turning point in my decision was actually after graduating from high school. In the summer of 1999, there were student uprisings in Iran. At that time, it was the start of cable television and, cable news networks. It was like the beginning of CNN and things. And for the first time, there was an uprising in Iran since after the 1988 massacre. So this is like for the first time after 11 years, we're seeing like a major uprising in Iran, because for 11 years, the regime was able to spread complete fear in society with the massacre that they carried out in 1988, where they had 30,000 political prisoners executed in 5-6 weeks from the start, like the day the ceasefire was signed between Iraq and Iran. And 11 years later, we saw a new generation coming to the streets. It was our generation, a generation that had seen nothing but this regime, had been born after the 1979 revolution. And it was also being televised for the first time. So we got to see those images coming out. And I remember thinking to myself, like, what are you going to do? Are you just going to stand here and be a, bystander and just watch? Or are you going to do something about it? And that's when I came to this crossroads, because I had gotten a full scholarship to go and study medicine. And that was like my path. That was what everyone had always told me to pursue since I was a child. You have to become something to be able to serve your people once Iran is free. And, all of a sudden I realized, I was like, well, at that time there were about 20,000 Iranian doctors in the US. And I was like, are you going to become one of those 20,000? Or are you going to do something to free Iran so these 20,000 can actually go and serve their own people? And so that is when I decided to join the resistance. And that was a very difficult decision, I guess. Especially, I think what made it really difficult for me was it wasn't giving up on everything in my own life, like the plans that I had or the goals that I had and everything. For me, it was leaving behind loved ones. Like my brother, who was 4 years younger than me, and he had already lost both our parents, my dad, and then separated from my mom, and then me leaving, I was like the only constant in his life, and I was leaving, and or like I understood that it was very difficult for my aunt, who was my guardian, because she had, in a way, she was very attached to her brother, which she had lost, and in a way, she had replaced me with my dad, and I remember, like, am I going to put her through that too? Like, because there are no guarantees. I mean, in this way, in this path, the first decision that you have to make is like, are you willing to sacrifice your life for the cause of freedom? And I had said, yeah, that was my decision. But am I willing to take that responsibility of the consequences for everyone else who remains? That was the hard part. Yeah, I guess almost 27 years later, the fight is still continuing, and I hope that they do understand why I made the choices that I made, and I think they do. But yeah, that's where we are today.
So, you've mentioned a lot of different women as we've been having this dialogue today, and the big part of this podcast is the ability to have a moment of the podcast to talk about the women who have shaped you into the woman that you are today. And you've already named several, but I want to actually call this out now in terms of, are there more the women that are responsible for the Zolal that sits here with me today?
There are plenty, yeah. But I think if I want to touch on a few of them, some of them, maybe it's just the stories that I've heard of them. Never had the chance to meet them because they were maybe killed by the regime, and then also like the actual role models in front of me. I think if I start, I remember like from childhood hearing about a girl. Her name was Fatima Mesbah. She was executed at the age of 13 in 1981. And I remember always seeing her picture and thinking, like, when you see this picture, it's like a picture of innocence, really. And I always thought to myself, like, how much did a 13-year-old know about politics to be executed on that? But the fact that she was so steadfast, and the fact that she was only 10 when the revolution had happened, but she realized, she was like, no, there was a revolution in our country to end dictatorship, not to replace one dictatorship with another dictatorship. And she became like a symbol for me, like growing up, knowing that, hey, it's not a given. Children your own age have lost their lives for the fight for freedom. And I think that had an impact on me. A second woman who really did make an impact on me was Ashraf Raja. Ashraf, she was a teacher, a physics teacher during the Shah's time. She was a political prisoner during the Shah's time, and she was part of the last group of political prisoners to be freed during the revolution. So on January 20th, 1979, she was released from prison. She became one of the main candidates for the parliament after the fall of the regime, and she was, that one of those progressive female figures in Iran's history at that time. And unfortunately, she was killed by the regime in February of 1982. So very short time after being released from the prisons of the Shah, she was killed by the regime. But she turned into like a symbol, and that's why, like, for instance, the Iranian resistance has like a city or a compound, and it's named after her. And I always remember seeing like her pictures everywhere or hearing her letters back when I was a child, and it really touched me at a different level. Like she was like a mother figure, I guess, to me in a way, and then like a source of inspiration. Her stories, I think most of anything, like the letters that remained from her really made an impact on me growing up. And I guess my greatest role model in life was Mrs. Rajavi that I mentioned before. She is the president-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran. for the interim government after the overthrow of the regime. But she has, okay, just imagine she is now in her 70s now, but she joined this movement when she was 19. And day in, day out, since the age of 19, she has only been solely concentrated on bringing freedom for the people of Iran and putting that responsibility on her own shoulders. Because I think it's one thing to be a member of a movement, but for the past 40 years, the whole weight of this movement has been on her shoulder. And I think that is a resilience that is unprecedented. And when you see her, when you come face to face with her, she's so humble and so caring and giving that you would never think that she carries like such a heavy burden. And she always, as I said, I think one of the key important things, she always says that, the best path, like when it comes to anything or any issue, she's like, oh, the solution is paying a price for anything. So always giving for others, making a sacrifice for others, and not only teaching that, but in practice, she has set that example for us. So the fact that she has been able to really break all these glass ceilings and be able to open the path for women in Iran to be able to come forward, I think that has been as I said, one of my greatest inspirations in life. And also I think my mom, because I think my mom taught me what's important in life with her own actions instead of words. Because I think whenever I look at, the circumstances that she had, she came to the US as a teenager at the age of 15. She went to high school and then was in college and whatnot. But then the executions began in Iran, so she decided to concentrate more on that. And she was like a very progressive activist and whatnot. And then 1988, she came to this crossroads. Like, my father had died. She was a single mother now with 2 kids, and she was only like 25, 26 years old. But she decided to join the resistance. And so that meant moving us to Iraq in a very unstable situation, I guess, in that time. It was at a time, it was before the Gulf War, so the world was in a different place with Iraq at that time. But when the first Gulf War happened, it wasn't very safe for children anymore, so she had to come to this decision, like, what is she going to do? Is she going to come back to the US and live with us, or is she going to continue this fight and send us back to the US? And she decided to do the latter. And I think for a mother to do that, it's a very, very difficult decision to give up. But I always understood, and I'm grateful that I understood that, but I always understood that she loved us so much that she didn't want to see any other children suffer the way that we had to. And so she decided to send me and my brother back to be raised by my aunt, but she decided to stay in this fight, and she has been continuing this fight now for 38 years now. And I think that, she has truly turned into like a symbol for me. And I always tell her that I'm very proud of her, and I hope that I could be the slightest amounts like her, and her dedication and her steadfastness, and the amount of people's lives that she has been able to touch has been extensive. So yeah, those are my real life oh, and also there's one other one that I would like to add. Sorry, it's getting long, but
it's all right.
There's I think it's the mothers of Iran, the mothers who have lost their children. 2 come into my mind right off the bat. One is Aziz. Aziz means dear in Farsi. There's a mother that everyone calls her Aziz because 5 of her children were killed during the Shah's time. And she became a symbol herself. At the age of 40, she was taken to prison herself, and she was tortured severely by Savak because of her children's activism. And her sons were like the symbols of the 1970s. Unfortunately, till this day, that she's in her 90s now, she still bears the signs of torture on the sole of her feet. But she has she set I guess, the bar to how to react towards your children being executed when they stood for freedom of the people, and how to continue their path. And she became like the inspiration of many, many mothers throughout these generations, decades. Even to this day, in January, we witnessed, I think the world saw some of the footages of mothers who were celebrating the lives of their children after they were killed by the regime, instead of, just uh, giving into the sorrow, even though it's very painful. But they understood, like our children died for a cause, and they did this for the freedom of our country, and it brings a responsibility for them. And she has been that rock for everyone for decades. And then there's another mother. Her name is Mother Ibrahim Pool. She is actually Amnesty International did a video of her, because her case is just so amazing. This mother, she has also had all but one of her children killed by the regime, and she has turned into a symbol of resistance, especially in the northern part of Iran where she's from. But you can imagine, her children. One of them was killed the day before his wedding. 40 days later, her second son was killed. And then about a year later, her daughter, who was pregnant at the time, was killed in a raid on their house. And then another son was also executed in the 1988 massacre. And, but she has, to this day, she is like she's so giving and caring and loving and full of life and full of, inspires people, and she's always there for others. And so I think that these mothers are, the ones who create this culture of resistance in our society, and they have done so for years. And the fact that they're still so steadfast, even in their old age, you still see them at the front line of every single demonstration and every single, event. And they have been able to really bear the pain and the suffering of the people of Iran, and have turned all of that into a source of inspiration for others. And I think that is something that I hope that history will one day write about them. I know some have already. There's actually a book about Mother Ibrahim Pool's life that just came out. It's in French. But I think the fact that like Amnesty International, they did do a special on her, because really these cases, they're something that I think could inspire the world. People heard about these brave women.
Yeah. Wow. So many great inspirational women that you've shared, and your story is one we can all learn from. And I'm honored that you took time out today to talk about that on Women In. And if people are looking to connect with you, Zolal, or learn more about your work, where can they find you?
Well, I am available on most social media platforms. So on Instagram, X, or LinkedIn. If you search my name, you should be able to come up to my page. If you would like to learn more about the movement, you can visit ncr-iran.org, or mariam-rajavi.com, or mariamrajaviforchange.com. If you'd like to learn more about the women's situation in Iran, you can visit the Women's Foreign Affairs, the Women's Committee of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, which is wncri.org. They do have a lot of really good material there, and information that could be useful to many who are interested. And if there's anything, feel free to reach out. We are always eager to learn, to be introduced to people. And just in case any of your viewers are in Europe, or maybe visiting Europe in the summer for vacation, on June 20th, there's going to be a huge rally in Paris that we're expecting about 100,000 people to be in attendance. It is to honor those who have been executed by this regime in recent months. And the call to action is to stop executions in Iran. but also in support of a secular democratic republic in Iran based on the 10-point plan presented by Mrs. Rajabi. So if you're in Paris, it's on June 20th. It's a Saturday, and it is in Place Vauban. It'll also be broadcasted live on social media, so you would follow and voice your solidarity by sharing it on social media if you'd like. So thank you very much for that.
Wonderful. Yeah. Well, thank you again for coming on and again sharing everything, your knowledge, your experience, and your force for change in such a positive way. I truly appreciate it. If you all are looking to connect with me, I am not hard to find. The hockey side of my life is at kwings.com. And then everything else I'm working on, whether it's my coaching, my conference, the podcast, or my book, Rebellious Success, which is available for pre-order now and published officially on August 11th, can be found at tonywill.com. And I too am on all social media under Tony Will. And until next time.